And I think that's one of the reasons we've talked about stereotype advancement as a key way in which race lighting is perpetuated, right? So stereotype advancement is when you take stereotypes about people of color and you purposely advance them in order to create a narrative about those people that is attached to them and sticks with them. So it's stereotype advancement. And we've talked about one of them, right, which is basically that we are prone to criminality.
Right.
Right. But you just talked about another one that's oftentimes used, which is that we're emotionally unstable.
Yep.
So do you have other examples when you've seen that emotional instability play out like that?
Yeah, well, one thing we know for certain is that and William Smith teaches us this in his work on racial battle fatigue, is that when you're immersed in a chronically racist environment, right, you are likely to suffer cognitive, psychological, and physiological consequences. Cognitive in terms of how your mind thinks and operates, psychologically in terms of how you feel emotionally and psychologically, right, and then physiologically in terms of the physical effects of it. And so when we think about when I'm anxious and nervous, right, and I can't process things, and then I'm feeling emotional or triggered, right, because of my repeated exposure to racism, and then I have headaches, and I have heart palpitations and all these physical things, right? When it all kind of happens, I might respond emotionally, right? I might be upset. I may yell something. I may sob uncontrollably, right? And so is that me being emotionally unstable, or is that me responding to, just being in an environment
we're exposed to trauma?
Right.
Another one that we've talked about in terms of stereotype advancement, we talked about criminality, we talked about being perceived as emotionally unstable, but another one is that we are incapable or academically inferior, that we're not able to do the work in the same ways that other people can. So I think about like a work environment where you have somebody who's in that environment and others may not believe that they belong there. They may not believe that they're as intelligent or capable. So what do? They try to undermine them. Right. And they undermine them in ways that make them feel that they're not good enough, that they don't belong there, that they're not intelligent or capable enough to do the work. And that plays on your mind. You start to second guess yourself because you can hear a message once and it may not affect you. But like that repeated trauma that you're talking about, you start hearing it over and over and over and over again, it really starts to play out with your mind.
And then you start to, what's interesting about that last example, you could have the best credentials, you could have a great resume or CV, you could have won all these prestigious awards, right? There could be very good evidence that you are smart, that you are capable, and that your contributions are important. But all of that can be outweighed and overshadowed by these experiences related to racial microaggressions, racial battle fatigue, and race lighting. Like that can overcome any tangible evidence of your excellence and your success.